a lot of people don't like that, and I don't blame them for not liking that. I could see how you wouldn't want to spend, years of your life doing that if you're studying in medical school, for instance. Hello, everyone. Jordan from NovaCards here. I am a former teacher and a current medical student at the University of Virginia, and I am a co-founder of NovaCards. Today, I'm here to talk to you guys about something that is frequently discussed with all sorts of different students, particularly medical students, and that is Anki. And we're going to discuss what is Anki, why should you care about it, or why shouldn't you care about it. So I'll start with this. Anki, first off, is a flashcard app, and it is a spaced repetition flashcard app. Both of those parts of the equation are important. We're going to talk about why they're each important in different ways and what makes Anki distinct as a tool that you can use in your education. So Anki is actually an open source app. That means that it is free to use, the desktop version of the app. There's multiple versions though, as I mentioned. There is the desktop version, there is a iOS version, and there's also a Android version as well. The desktop version of Anki is free to download from the Anki website, which you'll find in the description. The iOS version of the app is $25 in the App Store, which is a little expensive, but I'll talk to you about why I think that's important in a little bit. And the Android version of the app is free. And a lot of people ask, why is the iOS version $25? Why is the Android version free? And the reason for that is that the iOS version was built by the people who built Anki, and that's their only source of revenue, really, for Anki, is the iOS version of the app. The Android version of the mobile app was built by a third party, and they just did it out of the kindness of their hearts, and it's totally free for use. There are lots of different people that use Anki, but there's two groups in particular that come to mind when I think of Anki. The first is medical students, and that doesn't just include medical students who are studying to be doctors, but it also includes PA students, nursing students, pharmacy students, anyone in the medical sciences can really benefit from Anki. Another group of people that really use Anki are language learners. And actually that was the original purpose of Anki, was to help people learn languages because it helps you retain information for a long period of time. So Anki has two very distinct features that make it what it is. The first is that it's a flashcard app. The second is that it uses spaced repetition. Let's talk about each of those features separately. Being a flashcard app makes it fall into a very distinct category of studying. As a former teacher, I've seen lots of strategies that students use to study, and they can all sort of be divided into two distinct categories. The first is active studying, and the second is passive studying. Passive studying contains a lot of things that are kind of easier, maybe less involved. One is reading notes. Another is copying notes, highlighting things in a text, listening to a lecture, reading a textbook, very basic modes of consuming information. And notice I use the word consuming because you're not really doing much with the information once you get it. It just gets into your brain and just kind of stays there, and you hope you retain it. The second type of studying is active studying. This type of studying is a lot more effortful and contains some difficulty inherently in the way that you study. So there's a bunch of examples of this. One is taking practice tests. Another is drawing or diagramming difficult concepts, talking to another student to explain concepts to them. And then a final one that is important here is something called active recall. Flashcards use active recall to help you study. So that means that when you see a concept on a flashcard, you see a question, you have to think actively, okay, what's the answer to this question? Maybe it's been a while since you thought of it. And that process of trying to retrieve that information actively from your brain and either getting it correct or incorrect strengthens those neural pathways in your brain and helps you retain the information for longer. Now, you might suspect that there's a difference in the ability to retain information in passive versus active studying. And that's true. Studies have shown, and I'll show you some of the studies, that active studying is a lot better at helping you to retain information. And there's a couple reasons, there's a couple specifics to this, I should say. One is that the higher percentage of time that you spend doing active studying will result in higher test scores. Another is that using multiple modes of active studying, i.e. flashcards, practice tests, explaining concepts to a friend, also correlates to higher test scores. So really what you want to do when you're studying, and we'll probably release more content about this later, is you want to focus on a higher percentage of active studying and using multiple modes to study. Flashcards being an excellent one of those modes. Spaced repetition is the other really important feature of Anki. It has a very specific sort of definition in the learning world. And I can give you an example of how it works. So when you're studying with Anki, you'll get a flashcard and you look at it and you flip it over and you'll either say, I got it correct or I got it incorrect. If you get it correct in Anki, it'll show you the flashcard again in one day, typically if it's the first time you've gotten the card correct. So let's say the next day you're studying, you see the card again, you get it correct again. You click correct in Anki, and then what Anki does, what makes it different from other flashcard apps, is that it'll store the card, hide it away for you, and then it'll show it to you again 3 days later. Now it's increased the amount of time between your reviews of the information. Let's say you get it correct again, then it'll show the card to you again in 7 days. So first time you get it right, it's 1 day. Second time, it's 3 days. Third time, it's 7 days, and it goes on and on and on. So the idea with this is that as you're strengthening those neural pathways in your brain, you'll be able to space it out further and further, and then you'll be able to retain the information for a longer and longer period of time. There's a couple of advantages to this. One is that it helps you retain the information for longer, like I mentioned. The other is that you spend less time studying things that that you already understand. So let's say you get a card incorrect in Anki. So it's been a couple of days since you reviewed the card. Let's say it's been 3 days, and then the card pops up and you don't remember it. You click incorrect. What ends up happening is that the study schedule resets. So then the next time you get it correct, it'll show it to you again in 1 day, then 3 days, then 7 days. This is really advantageous for a couple of reasons. It helps you to retain the information for longer. It also helps you to focus more of your study time on concepts that are more difficult rather than just reviewing over and over things that you might already understand well. So many of you have probably heard of Anki before. Now, a lot of people love Anki, a lot of people hate Anki. There's very few people who are neutral about Anki. It inspires very strong feelings, particularly in medical students. And there's a number of really good reasons why you would like Anki and why you wouldn't like Anki. So we're going to start with the reasons why you might want to use Anki. I personally used Anki in medical school. I thought it was a really good resource, despite its many flaws. So we're going to start with that, and we'll see what you think about it. So the first reason you would want to use Anki is kind of exactly what it is sold for, and that's to retain large amounts of information for a long time. As mentioned, in medical school, this is particularly helpful for things like board exams. You're going to be consuming a huge amount of information in your classes, and it's going to be really hard to remember it, to remember to review all the little details as time goes on your own. But luckily, with the spaced repetition algorithm in Anki, it'll show you the cards exactly when it thinks it's best for you to see them. So you'll be able to remember concepts that you studied years ago without putting a lot of effort into figuring out exactly when you should review them and digging up the information in an old set of notes or anything. So it's really, really good at doing what it's advertised for, which is cramming a lot of information, keeping it with you for a long time, and particularly helpful when it comes to studying for a big, high-stakes exam like the USMLE board exams. Another reason to use Anki as a resource is that it is almost, but not quite, free. I mentioned before that the desktop version of the app is free, the Android version of the app is free, but the iOS version of the app is $25. A lot of people get a little surprised when they see a $25 price tag for an app. I know I was a little surprised when I first saw it, but I can tell you it was totally worth the $25 to get it on my phone. I spent so much time maybe stuck on the bus coming back from school, or if I was the passenger in a car or something, that I was able to spend doing flashcards that otherwise would have been wasted. So it's hard to really put a price tag on the amount of time that you can save with the iOS version of the app. I'll say this though, when you're in medical school and these other difficult programs that you might want to use Anki, time is probably your most valuable resource, and it's totally worth it to spend a little bit of extra money to have the convenience of being able to study whenever you have a little bit of spare time. Another thing that is almost free in Anki is the actual content to study. You can create your own flashcards if you want. They're are many resources that will teach you how to make good flashcards. But there's also lots of free resources available online. This is becoming somewhat less true. Some of the add-ons, modifications that you can make to Anki, you have to pay for. They're very useful, and so you might be willing to spend some money on them. Some of the content now is becoming paid for as well. However, there is a lot of free content that is available. So if you literally want to spend $0 to study with Anki, it's totally possible. You could download the desktop version of the app. You could get some free content online. And if you have an Android device, you could also study with the mobile app for free. Long and short, even if it's not completely free for you, it's still very inexpensive for the amount of value that you get out of Anki. Another thing to like about Anki is that it is highly, highly customizable. There's lots of different domains in the app that you can change to fit your exact needs. This can be a good thing. It can also be a bad thing. We'll talk about this more a little bit later. But specifically, there's a couple of domains that might be really relevant to you and to make the app work as good for you in your specific situation. The first is the review settings. So you can actually change those numbers that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. You can change it so it shows you the first review of the card in 3 days rather than 2 days, or you can change it to 12 hours, or you can change it to a week, or you can change it so that it changes the schedule of how it resets the card when you get a card incorrect, or many other features of the exact algorithm that Anki uses to space out your cards. So this can be helpful if you feel like you're getting too many cards, if you aren't seeing your cards more frequently enough, you're sort of forgetting them, it's too long between reviews. There's a lot of very specific details that we don't have time to get into that you can change with Anki. Another thing that you can change in Anki that is highly customizable is something called add-ons, which I already mentioned earlier in the video. Add-ons are almost like browser extensions. They're little snippets of code that you can put into Anki that either give it a new feature or change something about the way it works. There's thousands of add-ons, and they do all sorts of different things, from little tiny new buttons that allow you to do a nifty little trick to complete changes that add a lot of new functionality to Anki itself. Add-ons are a whole world in and of themselves when it comes to Anki. Many people recommend adding dozens of add-ons to really enhance the functionality of Anki, even when you just first start using it. I'll give you a couple of examples though. So one that comes to mind is something called the image occlusion add-on. I can show you some examples of image occlusion cards, but basically it's a card that takes a picture and then you block out certain parts of the picture or certain text in the picture, and allows you to use that card to study more visual information. So this is particularly helpful when it comes to things like anatomy or maybe graphs that you're looking at, to help you study very visual things. And you can make these cards really quickly, really easily with the image occlusion add-on. Another add-on that's really, really helpful is something called the Amboss add-on. Amboss is another company. We're not affiliated with them or anything. They have a question bank, and they have like a summary of a lot of medical knowledge that's very helpful. Their add-on is pretty cool. It allows you to hover over any medical text in your Anki cards, and it'll give you a definition of the word. You can click on it and learn more about this definition. So it sort of enhances the ability to quickly learn more information about the things that are in your flashcards. Another thing that you can greatly enhance in Anki is sort of the graphical user interface of the app itself. Anki is pretty ugly, in my opinion, when you just kind of download it initially. You can do a lot to change the background, to change the colors, to make it just feel a little bit more inviting. A lot of people, especially medical students, spend hours a day studying with Anki, and so it's probably worth your time to look into changing the way that it looks to make it feel maybe a little less depressing than sort of staring at a gray box for hours a day. So another thing that I already mentioned that's a really big plus for Anki is that there's a lot of pre-made content that is just ready for you to download and put into Anki to get started. Downloading flashcards online and putting them into Anki is very, very easy. You download a specific file type and you just open it in your browser, and it'll open it directly in Anki, and it imports the cards, and you can be good to go. So you can download, let's say you're studying Japanese vocabulary, you can download a deck with thousands of vocabulary words and click on it, and instantly you're ready to start learning. There's tons and tons of resources for medical students, pharmacology, infectious disease, cardiology, all the different subjects. There's a lot of in-depth resources. There's specific decks for USMLE exams. There's specific decks for exams from other countries. There's specific decks for physician assistant students. So just the breadth of content that's available for free is really impressive and really makes Anki a powerful resource to incorporate this great work that's been done by all these people out of the goodness of their hearts to give us free content. And it makes it a lot more appealing as an application because you don't have to spend the time actually making all of the cards for the most part, unless you like to make your own cards. Another reason that you might want to use Anki is that Anki does a really good job in adding different types of media to your flashcards rather than just text. So for instance, I already mentioned that you can add images. With certain add-ons, you can occlude parts of the image and make really, really powerful flashcards like that. Another thing you can do is you can add sounds. This becomes important for instance, listening to different types of heart murmurs. I've definitely used Anki to study heart murmurs like that. It might be helpful for language learners. I think you can even include video. So there's all sorts of different media that you can include in your flashcards that really kind of take your studying to the next level and make it more than just reading text from a textbook. It really adds to the studying experience. Another reason why you might want to use Anki is that it is pretty popular, and so there's a huge ecosystem online. And by ecosystem, I mean there's lots of people who have written lots of stuff about Anki that can help you solve almost any problem that you have. So resources that come to mind are like there's several Anki subreddits on Reddit that you can use. YouTube, there's tons of resources available for setting up Anki, how to use Anki. Just Googling, you'll find blogs, all sorts of different things. So if you run into any problems with Anki, if you have questions about how it works, or you want to change something about it, there's a really good chance that someone somewhere has written something about it. You can apply what they've learned. You don't have to go searching to figure out exactly how to get it to work for you the best. Another really useful feature with Anki that I used a lot in medical school was the fact that it works quite well offline. Maybe this is just me, but I spend a lot of time outdoors with my family. I also find myself on like airplanes pretty frequently or other situations where I don't have good internet access. So it really helps that Anki works quite well without an internet connection. As long as everything is synced between your devices, you can just pull up Anki on your phone or on your laptop and study away, and it doesn't really matter for the most part if you have an internet connection or not. When it does start to matter is if you want to save your progress and if you want to have it synced between all your different devices. So yeah, just keep that in mind, I guess. It's really convenient to study offline, but it's not perfect. Another reason to use Anki is that it does some of the busy work for you, and with a pretty big emphasis on some. The work that it does quite well is it helps you to figure out exactly when you should review the concepts that you need to help retain that information for the longest amount of time. So it would be super, super hard to do what Anki does without an application doing it for you. Trying to review all that information just in your notes or by going through on your computer or watching lectures would be almost impossible. Some people I know kind of do their own version of reviewing information before a test, all these things. I just think that's really difficult and time consuming, and I don't know how you would feel that you are being complete about it without spending a ton of time. So yeah, that sort of busy work is totally off your plate when it comes to Anki. It just gives you exactly what you need to do for the day. You don't have to really think too hard about it, and that saves a lot of time and a lot of mental worrying. At least it does for me, that I might be missing something. So I really appreciate that about Anki. Finally, one of the big things that I really loved about Anki in medical school in particular was that it gives you a bit of a sense of finality when it comes to studying. If you've done all of your reviews for the day, if you've added all the new cards you need to add and everything's done, Anki will tell you, hey, you're done. Put down your computer, whatever it is, and you can go enjoy the rest of your life. I think sometimes it would be easy to always feel like I needed to do more, like I needed to review another PowerPoint or I needed to read another textbook chapter or whatever it is. If Anki tells you you are done for the day, that's a good reminder for me that I should shut off my brain. I should take care of myself and take care of my family. That can be really hard to do in a very intense learning environment like medical school. So yeah, I appreciate that Anki goes out of its way to let you know that you should be done for the day. Okay, now we're going to talk about some of the reasons why you might not want to use Anki. Like I said, Anki inspires very intense reactions in people. Some people love it, some people hate it. We're going to talk about some of the reasons why people might hate it now. So the first reason, which I think kind of slaps anyone in the face as soon as they open Anki, is that it is so confusing. The layout, the way it works, it's pretty overwhelming. I pride myself on being a computer-oriented person. I've worked in several tech startups before. I've used computers my whole life. I understand a decent amount about coding. That being said, when I first opened Anki, I was pretty overwhelmed. Some screens are easier to navigate through than others. In particular, the browse screen is pretty overwhelming, especially with some of these more complicated decks that have different subdecks in them and all these different things. I will say this, anyone who's has enough drive to study on Anki is almost certainly smart enough to be able to figure out how to use it. But some people really just don't have the desire to get over the hump of how to set it up, how to get everything syncing between your devices. And that is pretty, I could see why they would feel that way. It's pretty overwhelming. And even when you're using the app, sometimes there's so many buttons, there's so many things going on, so many parts that you can change about the app that it can be distracting from the actual studying that you're trying to do. So using the app is confusing, setting it up is confusing, the whole thing is just confusing. And it doesn't really have to be that way. I'm greatly appreciative of the people who built Anki because it's a great resource and it's very inexpensive to use. But this aspect of it is just a problem of bad design. Like it could be designed in such a way that wasn't overwhelming, wasn't confusing, but still added the ability to customize the app to the way that you wanted. So a lot of people don't want to deal with that, and that's enough for them not to use Anki, and that's fine. Okay, now we're going to get into something that is probably my least favorite thing about Anki, and that is something affectionately known as ease hell. So remember when I was explaining the way the algorithm works, you get a card right, and then it'll show it to you again in 1 day, and then you get it right again, it'll show it to you again in 3 days, and then if you get it right again, it'll show it to you again in 7 days, etc., etc. Now, this is great because it spaces the cards out farther. You spend less time reviewing cards that you already understand. However, when you start adding hundreds of new cards a day and you have thousands and thousands of reviews, what ends up happening is that you end up spending a ton of time in Anki, and sometimes you can end up reviewing cards that you know pretty well over and over again each day. Even though they're being spaced out, there's just so much information you can put into Anki that you end up spending hours doing this, hours studying easy cards, and that's something that users call ease hell. It happens all the time to Anki users. So this is a pretty big problem. It's almost a fundamental problem with the way Anki works itself and what we often use it for. Like it's going to be hard to retain all of the information you need to do well on your board exams, no matter how you study it. If you're studying for medical school, for instance, that's always going to be difficult. And Anki is not immune to the fact that the amount of information is so huge that the algorithm in Anki isn't perfect. It's not always going to show you the information exactly right before you're going to forget it. So sometimes you end up just doing extra busy work studying this easy material that you might not need to know. Now, because this is a very fundamental problem, there's not a whole lot of great solutions. There are some solutions that are pretty good, though. So maybe I'm speaking too soon about that. There's something called FSRS. That's a new add-on that was developed relatively recently that helps to optimize the spaced repetition algorithm. You can mess with the settings yourselves in the spaced repetition algorithm. There's lots of posts about how to do this. But at a certain point, if you are going to try to retain a huge amount of information using Anki, you're probably going to end up spending a lot of time reviewing cards each day, just because of the nature of studying for something as difficult as a board exam, or even if you're trying to learn a language with Anki, there can be a lot of information that comes with that as well. Another pretty big difficulty with Anki is, well, I'll explain it to you like this. Your brain, once you learn a piece of information, you are sort of slowly always at risk of forgetting it. Like, it's like a slow, gradual decline that's always happening. Now, the problem is this gradual decline does not take days off. Like, you are always forgetting information that you have learned. And there's no way to easily tell your brain, hey, brain, take a pause. Let's not forget anything, and then I can continue reviewing tomorrow. So because your brain doesn't take a day off forgetting information, Anki doesn't give you a day off helping to remember the information either. So every day you're going to get new cards, Monday through Sunday. Every day you're going to have to flip through them. And every day, hopefully, that will help you to remember those cards. The big problem with this is human beings don't work like this. Sometimes you're going to have to take a day off. Maybe your family's in town. Maybe you're sick for a day and you just really don't feel like doing Anki. Maybe there's an emergency that happens. You have to put your flashcards down for the day. So you might be able to see where I'm going with this. The problem with this is, let's say that you have 500 reviews per day on average. You skip this day and don't review any flashcards, you are going to have 1,000 reviews to do the day after. There's no way to avoid this in the current way that Anki is set up. You are just going to have to review double the amount of cards if you don't spend your time reviewing your flashcards. So taking days off is not something that is very easy to do. I believe there are some posts about ideas for how to take days off. I think the FSRS algorithm has some ideas for how to do this too. But it's sort of also sort of inherently baked into the way that Anki works. If you are always forgetting information, you should always be remembering information or trying to remember information. And Anki is going to do that for you, whether you like it or not. And that can be really hard when you do it every day for years, studying for an exam, for instance. Here's another issue with Anki that I sort of get annoyed about. Maybe some people, it doesn't bother them as much. And that's that when you use Anki, it feels like you are using like Windows 95 era technology, just the way the graphics work. Certain features that you have to sort of live with are also feel very old. For instance, Anki, in the way it's initially set up, you have to manually sync every time you finish studying on your devices. So let's say you're studying on your laptop and then you have to go run to the store to get something and you want to study while you're waiting in line at the store. If you forget to hit the sync button on your desktop, your new cards are not going to be available in the mobile version of Anki. And you're going to just not be able to spend that time, that spare time that you would have otherwise spent studying in the store. So there's some add-ons that you can get that will sync automatically for you. But again, it's not a feature that's built into Anki. You have to think about it. You have to put the add-on in. And there's other little features like this that are kind of old school or a little irritating as well that might sort of dissuade you from using Anki. Okay, here's another feature of Anki that might have been, it's up there with one of my bigger pet peeves that I had while using Anki, and that's finding relevant flashcards for what you are studying. So a lot of times the way Anki works for medical students is you will download a deck of, let's say, like 30,000 flashcards that contains all the information you need to know for step one. It's all there. It's all great information. But you are going through your lectures in medical school at a different pace, at a different time than every other medical school that exists in the country. So maybe you are learning about cardiology and this one lecture you're learning about contains these 5 diseases in it, and maybe that's different from the 5 diseases that were studied in a different school's cardiology lecture. So what ends up happening is you are trying to figure out what diseases are in this lecture, because maybe you have a quiz on Friday for this exact lecture. And so you end up digging through the content in this lecture. Maybe it's through slides or a textbook chapter, whatever, and you try to figure out what content in this lecture is covered in these flashcards over here. And so finding out which cards are relevant to your lecture can take a huge amount of time. Even with really good tags in the Anki cards that show you which diseases are covered by which cards, it's pretty time consuming and it's inefficient, right? Like this is not something that we need to be doing in the 21st century, really, right? Like just finding what cards are relevant to each other. Luckily, this was a big enough issue that this was sort of one of the initial ideas that came from NovaCards, which is the company that me and some friends co-founded here in Virginia. So NovaCards has a feature called Card Finder, where you can upload lecture notes, you can upload a PowerPoint, lots of other different sources of information, and it will find exactly which flashcards are relevant to it from a bunch of different popular Anki decks. So this has saved me hours and hours. It's saved lots of students all over the world hours and hours, finding exactly what information is relevant to your lecture and getting it into your Anki deck as fast, or into your Anki app as fast as possible, so that you don't have to waste time on work that is not high yield for your studies. Another thing that is really time consuming and can be a little annoying in Anki is actually creating your own flashcards. This is sort of a bit of a controversial topic for some people. Some people like to make their own flashcards because it helps them sort of digest their notes. I think that can be a good use of time, but sometimes you've already made the notes. You don't feel like cranking out a bunch of flashcards yourself on your computer, and that can be really annoying to make your own flashcards. Luckily, this is another thing that we thought of in NovaCards. The NovaCards also has a feature called Card Maker. Similarly to Card Finder, you upload your notes, you upload a PowerPoint deck, whatever it is, and NovaCards will go through and it will create high-yield, relevant flashcards from those notes. And you can download that instantly, put it in Anki. You don't have to worry about wasting time creating flashcards for yourself. Okay, another big issue with Anki is related to one of the previous issues, which is ease hell. So ease hell, remember, means you're studying lots and lots of easy flashcards. It takes hours and hours a day. And because of this, Anki can kind of balloon into this huge time suck during your day. It can take 4 or 5 hours to get through your Anki cards each day. This can be exhausting for one thing, but when it becomes downright harmful to your learning is if it crowds out other sources of studying that you might otherwise be engaged in. Remember, I said at the beginning of this video that there's research that shows that the percentage of time you spend doing active learning is correlated to test scores, but also the number of different types of active learning strategies is also correlated to test scores. So let's say that you prefer a couple of different types of active learning. Let's say you like to do flashcards, you like to study practice questions, and you also enjoy going to study groups and talking about concepts with other students. Let's say Anki flashcards grows to be so huge that you say, I don't have time to go spend with these other students in a study group. If that happens, you are down one of your active learning strategies, and that could end up being really harmful for your performance on a test. I'm not saying that Anki always has to do this, but it can end up taking so much time that you might harm your overall retention of information by sacrificing other study strategies. Just be mindful of that when you choose to use Anki. Finally, another big downside of Anki is just that it can be really repetitive to day in and day out study with it all the time, no breaks, no days off. I just remember a feeling of dread waking up early in the morning and knowing that I had hours of Anki to get through, and that there was no way of me escaping it. And just having to sit there and hit the space bar on your computer over and over again can really drain you. A lot of people don't like that, and I don't blame them for not liking that, because I don't know, it just feels very unnatural just to be sitting in one place doing the same thing over and over again. And I could see how you wouldn't want to spend years of your life doing that if you're studying in medical school, for instance. And yeah, there's other strategies to study that don't involve sitting there doing the same thing all day long. And maybe for some people it's worth it not to do that. So this brings us to the final question of this video, which is, should I use Anki? So as you might expect, this is a very, very personal, individual question that I can't answer for you, of course. There's too much individual variation in studying. That's one thing we've learned a lot about through NovaCards is people study in very, very individual ways. But I can give you some guiding questions that might help you think through how to use Anki in a healthy way, and if that's sort of the route that you want to go. So let me read a couple of these for you. Do you have additional study strategies that will complement Anki? Do you have the discipline to keep up with each of your reviews each day? Are you okay spending a large percentage of your study time on a screen of some kind, sitting at a desk, kind of doing the same repetitive thing each day? Do you have people to talk to about Anki if something isn't working, if your strategy isn't producing the results you want, if you're frustrated with it, etc. And the final one that is a bit controversial in some circles is, are you okay cutting back on the number of cards that you study each day if you are overwhelmed by the number of cards that you have? Some people think you should just crank through all the cards, in a given deck, and there's some merit to that strategy, but it's worth considering if it really is a wise use of your time to do so. For me, the benefits of Anki outweigh the costs. It was a good study strategy. It helped me to retain information better, I think, in medical school than I would have otherwise. It helped me to have structure to my studying that I might not have otherwise had. And yeah, it provided the convenience to get through my studies in an efficient way so I can spend time doing the things that I liked. So you might be asking, how do I get started with Anki? The easiest way is just to go to the Anki website, which I will put in the description. Be sure you go to the correct website. Sometimes people go to the wrong one and they download the wrong app. Just make sure to go to the right one. That will have links to the iOS app. It'll have links to the Android app. You can search on Reddit after you download that for flashcards that might be useful, or just search on Google. There's lots of different places you can get flashcards. If you have any questions, there's lots of good YouTube tutorials about how to set up Anki. We'll probably make some more content about how to set it up effectively, how to use it. It's really quite easy to get started, so give it a shot. In conclusion, Anki really is one of the best tools that's out there for retaining a large amount of information over a long period of time. It is an active study strategy that helps you get the most out of your time when you're studying, and it's really inexpensive. So I think for most people, it's a really good resource. For us, though, we saw that there was lots of ways Anki could be used more effectively, and that's why we created NovaCards. NovaCards is all about studying efficiently, getting to where you need to go the fastest, so that you can spend your time either pushing yourself to an even higher level of mastery over your subject, or spend your time doing research or with your family, whatever it may be. We think that there's a more efficient way to study, and that's why we've created the tools that can help you get there. Check out the link below to see what you can do with NovaCards and how it can help you study. So what do you think about Anki? Do you like using Anki? Do you not like using Anki? Did I miss reasons why you should use Anki? Did I miss reasons why you shouldn't use Anki? Am I totally off base, and is Anki a complete waste of time? I'm not sure. You tell me. What is your thought about this whole situation? I'd love to hear what you think, and we'll see you later.